Hi, this is John Firth, and you're here for another segment of Firth and Friends. Today, we're going to talk about executive anxiety. And anybody listening to this who has been in any sort of position in a company, large or small, knows what it means to be anxious. Anxious about a new rollout of an IT system, anxious about a new program, a new product, anxious about your situation at the company, anxious about the layoffs that might come or may not come. It's all pervasive. So we're going to discuss this now with Neil Pesson. He's one of my coaches at Executives Over 50, and he is a trained psychologist. And he's going to start by introducing himself, and then he's going to give us a good working definition of anxiety, what it is and what it's not. So Neil.
Welcome. Thank you so much, John. So let you know who I am and what I've done. I've started this is a second career for me. Long ago, I was a photographer for many years, and now I went back to school and got my degree, and then went on for further analytic training. So I've been doing this for a really long time, and the long time is the key for me because every day is more learning and learning about myself and learning about what others need from me. So I started a business, a behavioral health business, and ran that for decades, and then have moved into this role working with John and others about helping people stabilize themselves in their workplace so that they know better how to handle situations and handle themselves in those situations. So now,
above all, when they're leaving their careers, how they then handle probably at least my experience, hardest transition, because nobody can tell you exactly what's going to happen when you start winding down one career and start up another phase of your life, which is what we do at Executives Over 50.
I certainly could use my own life as illustration for that in many circumstances. I'll save that for a little later. So let me just give you some footing on where anxiety, how it's defined, and what we're going to talk about. And I've drawn from a number. You can look it up yourself. There's a diagnostic and statistical manual that psychiatry and psychology uses, and it has a very specific diagnosis. And I'm using some guidelines that right here in this conversation that the Mayo Clinic has produced, so that all of this is accessible online, but most of us don't look things up very often. So here we have it. So the anxiety is a feeling of dread and uneasiness. It might cause you to sweat, feel restless, tense, have a rapid heartbeat. It can be a normal reaction to a stressful situation. You might feel anxious and faced with a difficult problem at work or school, or you might just be in the moment anxious, and that is not unusual. So anxiety is not but in its own word, an abnormal situation. So
by me, I often feel it in the pit of my stomach when I know something not good is going to happen. Or even if I suspect it, there's a pit in my stomach. That's, for me, the most common area.
Yeah, well, it could be any part of your body, but yes, it's frequently sort of gastrointestinal and abdominal. People feel it sometimes in tingling sensations in their hands. They feel they're sweaty. I mean, there's a whole bunch. I'll go through a whole list of things one can choose themselves what they think is their experience.
Well, let's talk about what it's not now. It's not depression. It can result in depression. But is it considered depression? Or is depression considered a kind of anxiety?
It's a different disorder, but it can coexist with anxiety, and it's often fueled by anxiety. There's depression and another disorder, which is frequent and not often called that, but in the vernacular, but OCD. So those people with repetitive disorders that create anxiety when you're not doing it and create different anxiety when you're doing it. So you're really never escaping anxiety.
No, I have ADHD. Is that considered? Does anxiety fuel that? I can tell you from my life, it felt like it got worse when I was anxious.
Anxiety fuels everything, and the good news is it fuels good things. So, I mean, I used to work with people, and I'm really sort of a bug about defining things. Come to me and they say, "I'm really anxious about going on vacation." Are you anxious about going on vacation, or are you eager, or are you both? And they are different words meaning different things. I think helping define for your client yourself what the word means is important. So yes, depression can get fueled by anxiety. The sense of dread that you feel in depression is fueled by I can't get away from myself. These things that are going on in my head, they won't stop, and I just feel terrible about myself. I'm a loser, and nothing good is going to happen for me. I can't get out of bed today.
And
So
that's an important thing to mention up front. You've talked about the good anxiety that fuels us. If you know you have a presentation coming up, you might have a little bit of anxiety, but that anxiety actually gets you going, gets your endorphins going, gets you energized in the flow. What we're really talking is about the dreaded anxiety. And we'll talk a little bit about how that occurs. But anxiety can also be overwhelming. It's not periodic. I've had several clients that have had to deal with it for a long, long time and had taken medications. And the part you just brought up is a very important one, which is the voices in our heads. And we'll talk a little bit about how I work with patients about that. But anxiety often is, as you said, fueled by these negative thoughts that then take you down to your survival instinct, your amygdala, because there's a neural pathway with judgmental negative thoughts, usually about yourself, someone else, or a situation. And there are only two responses in that amygdala. It's fight or flight, neither of which are particularly useful in modern day society. And so those voices, when you start learning to listen to the voices, you start realizing what you're doing to yourself. And it's part of the therapy, which we'll talk about in a little while.
So yes, I mean, fight or flight might be useful depending on what organization you work with,
Yes.
and maybe getting the hell out of there is the thing you got to do, or maybe figuring out how to survive is the thing you have to do if you're not eager to leave. So I think what you're saying is true. There's a sense of anxiety which is a fuel, and when it's healthy and it's useful, it's a fuel. I used to have panic attacks when I had to do public speaking. I couldn't. I grew up relatively mute. My sister thought I couldn't speak at all. But I chose
to change that.
I'm here. I anytime I had to do public speaking was an anathema to me. I mean, I just couldn't imagine doing it. Even in grade school, standing up and reading out loud was panicky for me. It had little to do with success. I was good at school, and I could read. But the performance part of it was really anxiety provoking for me. And then I won't go through the whole story, but I worked toward that end by trying to face that fear and anxiety and slowly chip away about the confidence I had that I actually knew what I was talking about. So that brings in a whole lot. One that you like to talk about, John, is the imposter syndrome. Am I the right person for doing this? And should I be doing this? Should somebody else be doing this? Maybe I shouldn't be here at all. And then there's the piece that it's just a physical reaction to having to do something as a performance was really, really difficult for me. The long story short is I worked on it really hard for a really long time. And now I welcome the anxiety before a performance of any sort, because I know if I don't have that anxiety, I'm going to be flat.
Exactly.
So it becomes your tool, not only your dread. And I think the thing that we're talking about here is that with the proper work, with the proper person, including yourself, if you could do it on your own, do it on your own. But if you can't, there are people there who can help you get past those moments to take those dreaded issues and make them skills for you. I mean, if you like, I could tell you a brief story about
well, actually, I wanted to quickly remind everybody what we're watching here. This is finding relief from executive anxiety, the bad anxiety. And I'm the CEO of Executives Over 50. Neil is a psychologist who recently joined the coaches at Executives Over 50 and an expert in all kinds of anxieties that we're going to find out more about. So let's talk now, Neil, about how it demonstrates itself, how it makes it apparent, how it occurs to yourself and to others. We've talked a little bit about the voices in your head and the feeling in your stomach, tingling feelings and so forth. But what are some of the signs that maybe you don't realize you're quite so anxious, but there's something going on that people can tell you're anxious, for example?
Well, I mean, often when we feel anxious, we think everybody can see it. And we sometimes prove it by doing something that is against our interest, by bolting from the room or trembling in public or doing things that we can't always control because we just got to get out of this feeling. Let me just read a quick list that Mayo Clinic has put together about
awesome.
Ones we already mentioned: feeling nervous, restless, or tense. Tense is an interesting word, but people know it when they feel it.
And they
Having,
know it when they see it.
yes,
Huh.
having a sense of impending dread, panic, or doom. Having an increase in heart rate, breathing rapidly, hyperventilating, sweating, trembling, feeling weak or tired, trouble concentrating or thinking about anything other than the present worry, having trouble sleeping, experiencing GI problems, having difficulty controlling worry, and having the urge to avoid things that trigger anxiety. There are several disorders that follow from that, but we can stop there and sort of think about that list of all the symptoms that one could have that are anxiety, and then driving you to often not self-encouraging behavior. Um,
Or
um,
self-empowering, I like to say.
and
You
self-empower.
disempower yourself very quickly.
Yes. And not performing up to your ability. I mean, so you prove to yourself the reason you should worry is that you did something that makes you worry, and now you repetitively think about that. It keeps you up at night. You feel anxious when you think about it. You try not to think about it. The next event
Mhm.
comes up because we go to work every day. The next event comes up, and here it is again, and you
Yeah,
prove yourself once again, and then you're down the rabbit hole.
right. And then you're playing double jeopardy. You're being anxious about your anxiety.
Yeah, talk about losing propositions.
Yes, exactly.
And it's really hard to get out of it. I mean, all of us, I think, have at one point or another been sleepless over some worry or anticipation of a big interview, a big test, a
Mhm.
having to talk to somebody at your job now that you're an executive that you prefer not to have this conversation, but you cannot avoid it any longer. Usually, negative conversations. They make they make good people worry a lot.
Yeah.
Sadly, bad people don't worry about them.
But when they're over, that feeling of lightness, my mother used to say my father was a pessimist. And I suppose you could say that a little bit about myself, but he actually did it on purpose. He said, if you're pessimistic about an outcome, you'll be delighted that it doesn't happen. And you actually work harder to make sure it doesn't happen. And that's a little form of this mild anxiety, performance anxiety. Um, and
That's a tricky philosophy, but I like it.
Yeah, and we can put that in the bucket of therapies that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But mindset plays a huge role. Understanding your mind, how to control your mind, plays a huge role in dealing with anxiety. But let's talk about some of the things we've seen and where they've gotten really bad. I talk often about something I did that was totally an anxiety, um, which was I had accidentally fired an employee from the Association for Management Consulting Firms that I was running, and she sued us and myself and the board. And the board was pretty furious at me. They didn't fire me, but for a year I felt like I was under their thumb, and I felt like I was being dictated to, and we had to take these training courses, and we felt that we were, as usual, understaffed, under-resourced, and expect high expectations. So the annual meeting came around the next year. The firing happened right before the annual meeting. And I was particularly tense because I had spent a year. I was in my mind already saying, you're out of here. I had wanted to quit a year before, and I didn't because I wanted to see if I could solve this. I felt I needed to do that. So I was very anxiety prone. It's been a year. Things hadn't gotten better. In my mind, I was already fleeing. I was in the amygdala. And we went to the annual meeting, everything really well until an awards presentation we made. And a good friend of mine, a Harvard professor, got into a stream of talking. It was hilarious, very funny. That was rather insulting. We had these were all major consulting firms, and the senior executives, they had brought clients like IBM, Caesar's Pizza, I think, or something, well-known brands, and he started insulting them. He was a little left-leaning. I walked off the stage with huge anxiety and immediately got pounced on by several senior partners at one of the big four. And my anxiety level was so high that I quit in a very vocal way, marched up to the chairman of the board in front of, the big names in the consulting industry, and told her that I was resigning and used a few words I can't repeat here. Walked out thinking I was holding my head up high, and just the opposite happened. I kind of crumbled for a year or two and had to find my way back. But that's, for me, the most extreme example of how I let my anxieties just completely wear me down.
Well, that is extreme, and you're not
Mm,
alone in doing rash things when you're under a ton of pressure, and that's
mm,
one of the dangers of anxiety that is uncontrolled. I mean,
mm,
it's hard to ward off an anxiety that is slightly pervasive, maybe for a day or two or three, when there's a big event around which you're sort of
mm, mm,
surrounding yourself. But those usually are transient. But the underlying anxiety that one has that helps fuel that isn't transient. And I think it becomes a disorder when it's persistent over time. And an example that you're offering is one that is a terrible outcome to getting
mhm.
something off you.
Unplanned outcome,
That,
not well thought through outcome.
that's terrible, right?
Yeah,
um, and the goal there is to just shed it. I can't bear this anymore.
please.
This
Yeah,
jacket is too heavy for me.
yeah.
And then you think, because you're now rational, there were better ways to do this, and
Mhm.
I have harmed myself. The story is extraordinary, but not unusual in different volumes. I've had more pervasive versions of that for myself. I
Mhm.
grew up really rather poor, and my charge against the world was I was going to succeed where and nobody else in my family had succeeded, and I was hell bent on doing that. So I was good at sports, I was good at school, um,
Mhm.
good at another career that I had, and then I decided to change it, and it threw me for a loop because I didn't feel confident any longer. I was now in the world that I had not traveled in for a very long time,
Mhm.
and I was angry. But that anger,
Mhm.
when I got a scholarship to play ball to college, so the person who is defending against you is your enemy, and I faced life like that.
Mhm.
Till I did this talk, which I was forced to do in graduate school, and I, of course, overprepared, so I did a good job, but
Right.
I
Mhm.
didn't do a good job in the presentation. So I went back to my supervisor's office and he said, great, great, great. He said, except you sounded so angry. And it was nothing to be angry about, except I was angry at the world. And that was an epiphany for me. I didn't know how to
Mhm.
do that. But it was clear that now that I didn't have that as a tool, I was anxious about what I would be. Flash forward, I finished school. I wake up 7 years later, wake up thinking like, I guess the statute of limitation must have run out. They can't take my degree away any longer. And
Right.
they won't, if they find mistakes, too bad.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Your imposter syndrome suddenly disappeared on you.
it had nothing to do with reality. Nobody's ever going to look at it again.
Right.
Dissertations are never to be read. So it's. I think we are unaware most of the time when there's
Mhm.
a pervasive sort of experience that we sit on, and then it exacerbates itself when there's a trigger for it. And that's
Mhm.
one version of anxiety. There are others that are far more pervasive and more constant. Um, so the trick for me was to find out what was driving my behavior so that I
Mhm.
could do something better with my life and progress. And it worked. It took a while. It doesn't happen in one conversation, but it took a while. And I've used that sort of mindset with most of the people I work with, even for a short time. Understand what's going on for you is the best tool you have for progressing.
Exactly. It's what I call mindfulness.
There you
The more you understand yourself and the more you understand the world around you, which I
go. Mhm.
call empathy, you understand how people feel and think, the more mental strength you have to withstand these anxieties and other, I don't want to say maladaptive, but basically your fears and your beliefs getting outside and you begin to block reality and then the anxiety comes. The anger, I wanted to mention that quickly. I had a lot of anger when I resigned. In fact, I would have said I was more angry than I was anxious. But
Mhm.
that's again the exhibit, literally the neural pathway going down through our amygdala. Anger is fighting, and the other emotion is I got to get out of here. So again, it's always comes back to the basics. When we get anxious, it goes down to the amygdala, and either we want to run away, which I basically did at that annual meeting, I ran away, or we're angry and we want to start fighting. Both of them people can see, even if you don't see it. Sometimes it's so glaringly obvious to everybody around you, and you're the last to know it. Which brings us to the last part here, which is we want to talk about things we've done. We've touched on a little bit, but all the things that people do to control their anxiety, if I can say that. And I just wanted to remind people this is Finding Relief from Executive Anxiety with myself, John Firth, and Neil Pesson, a coach with the program Executives Over 50. We're now going to talk about resolutions, how we have both what the journey was that we took and some of my clients and some of his clients. So you really get an idea. There's a whole range of ways to deal with this. However, I think we both mentioned it. It's a mindset issue. It's actually getting clear on who you are, what your purpose is, and then understanding yourself. My understanding of myself came over many years working with coaches and becoming a coach. And then I took a course called Positive Intelligence, which was developed at Stanford Business School with psychiatrist Shazad Shamin, who basically taught me what I just said about the amygdala and the need to go to your prefrontal cortex through positive thinking, which then, of course, is the enemy to anxiety, positive thinking. And I actually trained myself. And I should say not train myself. I took his course. I led the course in little pods that we called pods. And it took a couple of very bad moments, but I got through it. And the way when I knew I had gotten through it, because those angry little voices, those voices telling me I'm not good at something, or I'll never be good, or I'm not worth it, I'm an imposter, they all disappeared. And there was actually a process I went through. And the very end, I sat here for a few hours. Everything went black, dark. The voices were overwhelming me, but I had learned to let them speak themselves out. It's called giving them no oxygen, Tony Robbins says. And lo and behold, it happened twice. After that, I have complete control of those voices. And sometimes I let them in, and sometimes they do come in unwanted because you shouldn't repress them. But I've now learned to separate myself from these voices and these feelings that got me into trouble.
I think it's a good example of using your other power to overcome a symptom of what has grown in you. We come to who we are over the time and how we were built and how we were raised. I mean, parental blame. That's not my issue here, but we all learn.
We'll have another session about that.
There's plenty of fuel for that one. But we become who we are. We're born with it. We're born with a temperament, and we grow a personality and character.
Right. Often inherited from our parents or from our
environment, parents. It's not surprise people who live in more oppressive conditions, or are poor or beaten down will become one kind of person. Doesn't mean that you can't if you're wealthy or comfortable,
right.
But you have different concerns tangibly if you are wealthy or comfortable. It doesn't mean that it was all great. It just means that you're different. So I think
on that note, I would say I grew up in the opposite, in quite a nice suburb, Short Hills. My father was a corporate lawyer, made money, went to Harvard. My parents went to Harvard. I can't tell you, the most anxious people I know come from those kind of backgrounds, to the point that they become addicts, drug addicts, commit suicide, or they just make themselves miserable. But I have seen more anxious, troublingly anxious people who come from the sort of background that I had, which was privileged, I would say.
Maybe one of them is calling you now.
So the voice is calling me.
So I'm trying to tease out all the elements here. I think we had to give credence to the fact that we are certain kinds of people, all of us individually, and then we become who we become. And that part is early on not so much of a choice, because as a kid, you can't do much about it, and you don't even realize it. I can't tell you what I didn't know until I went away to college and learned there's a whole other world. And that made me angry. I was already angry, made me angrier. But I think that there are styles of living who we are that can be useful or not useful. I think that there are two kinds of people who become successful. I think people who have a dash of OCD, and I think of people who are a dash of sort of hypomania, very energetic and forward.
It's interesting you said that. I was going to take part in a study The qualification, one of them was you had to be diagnosed as depressive, clinically depressive. So I went through a series of questions and so forth with a psychiatrist or psychologist. And she said, no, unfortunately, you can't take part in the study, Mr. Firth, because you're not depressive, you're manic depressive, you're bipolar. Slightly, she said, nothing I would necessarily worry about. Remember, 10% of all CEOs in the United States are diagnosed as manic depressive or bipolar.
I'm not surprised. It's a fuel that drives you forward without regard to
productivity.
I mean, it's like I call most of that stuff hypomania, because it is an energy that is beyond usual. You know, I can work 14 hours. I know when I started my business, the development of that firm was I worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, because I was the only one. And it took me a long time to realize I was now hiring people I can hand things off to. But the mistrust of even these smart people I hired them because I really liked them 8 hours a day. But I just couldn't hand off stuff yet. And that's sort of a mix of my obsessive nature, which is getting things right and perfect.
As you're a hyperachiever.
And then not feeling like I can't stop. I had momentum. Of course you can stop.
Right.
What you left on your desk yesterday will be there today. So, but it doesn't feel that way. And that to me is all very anxiety driven. Yeah. It is. But it's sort of a definition of a nature of who you are. It's not the pure anxiety, but it all fits the same realm.
Right. And it can have all of the same negative consequences. I was talking about a pre-LinkedIn Lives. This was using a proprietary software. I think we use Zoom. And the topic was misbehaving at work. And it was about behaviors in the workplace. We were having a technical issue. This was right in the middle of COVID. It was one of the first times I had used Zoom. And I was going nuts because we were already 10 minutes, 15 minutes into the actual webinar that people paid for, and we couldn't get the technology right. My anxiety level just went so high, I started screaming at people, literally misbehaving in the worst way possible. So I was an example of how you can misbehave at work. But my anxiety just, here are people who had paid for the webinar. We looked like idiots, and it caused that burst of anger.
So I think you hit on another theme here about people feeling not the same, not quite like imposters. I think that's a particular version of it, but I think feeling like we will be revealed, we are inadequate. I can't tell you, in the first part of my new career, the calling to the head of the department I was working in, I always thought I was going there to be fired. There was no evidence that I should be fired in my mind or others, but I felt like this is the walk of doom. It's like the long walks into the dentist's office. Like something bad is going to happen, and it never did. And then I had to coach myself, really, and then talk to others to coach me. That how do I shed this? Because one day you might be fired, but it'll be for cause.
Right, exactly. Or I resigned, but if I had been the chairman of the board by that point, I think I would have fired me.
Exactly. And hopefully you're a good executive, and you're telling your staff on a regular basis how they're doing, and nothing should be a surprise. But we don't like to have those conversations. Good people don't like to have those conversations about others' failure. Even if it has to happen, we get all charged up about it, and they get anxious and get restless and get sleepless and all those other things that happen to us. And yet it is a job function, and not an unusual function, sadly.
It's something you can learn too. I developed methodology out of some videos. Simon Sinek has several videos on having to have difficult, or how do you have difficult conversations, specifically at work, but it can be personal too. I found a couple of others, strung them together, and suddenly I had a methodology, which I won't go into now, but you can learn to have a difficult conversation. I've been using this methodology for about 2 months. Several clients literally got through some very tough situations. Two co-founders of a company who are clients of mine, we use that methodology because they had something they had to tell the other, and they were very anxious. So you can learn to have difficult conversations.
you bring it, pardon me, but I hope you bring it to your personal life as well, because it is hard to have a conversation with your mate about something that you feel is so petty, but it annoys the hell out of you.
Mhm.
The one hint here is always have it from an I conversation. It's not about a them conversation.
Right.
Um, so I think that has helped me focus on, it is my need to tell you this. You might not feel the same way. On a
Mhm.
little bit different, where you have a need to perform in a way that is consistent with what we as an organization need you to perform, and do the tasks that will reach the success we're aiming at. So I
Right.
think
You're not talking about your wife right now, I assume.
no, you're talking, no, well, for her too, maybe, who knows? So,
Yeah, right.
but
Um,
for on the job, it's like we don't want to say you're doing a good job, but you could do a little better. It's,
mhm.
I mean, and when it's worse than that, they have a behavior that needs to be corrected. That's even harder. Not
Yeah,
everybody, but I think most of us are reluctant to have those conversations. They create
yeah,
an anxiety for us.
yeah. And again, it can be learned. Let's talk about some of the obvious ways that people deal with anxiety and stress. I have quite a number of clients who do yoga or meditation to calm the brain down. All of this is about really calming your brain down.
Mhm.
Medication, Klonopin, Lexapro. I don't know some of the medications that you know of.
Ativan, Paxil, stuff like that.
Yeah,
There's different classes of medication best described by your prescriber.
mhm,
Go to somebody who knows what they're talking about. 90% of all psychoactive drugs are prescribed by uh, primary care physicians. Used to be
right. With
general
with a
practitioners.
couple of exceptions, but yeah.
Yeah. So don't be bashful of going to your primary care doc. If that primary care doc isn't prepared, they should refer you to a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner who knows this business. Um,
Mhm,
and I mean, it's I've done that. When I start to get really wound up,
mhm.
my favorite anti-anxiolytic has been Ativan. I was once in a plane that was threatened to crash, and I never
Oh
flew
my God.
fully after that. So I would take, and I don't do it any longer, but I would take an Ativan before I got on the plane with
Yeah.
the wish to fall asleep.
Right, but and come back alive too. My one of my best friends is a senior partner at a large consulting firm. She worked with me at one point at Discovery, so she's had quite a trajectory. She nibbles on a Klonopin every day, so she takes maybe 5 or 6 during the course of the day, and she'd be the first to say that that has contributed. I mean, she's very talented and very smart, but that has allowed her to keep her feet on the ground and not to let her anxieties get the better of her. So she very consciously, God, probably now 15, 20 years, she just takes a Klonopin. I don't know what the dosage is, and she nibbles on
So I think you're hitting an important point. I think what will it take you that is not maladaptive to get to be the success you're capable of being?
it. Right.
I mean, I
Or
have
whatever you want to be, how you define success. In her case, it was
sometimes our goals are not the right goals, so
Mhm.
doing that, but putting that part aside, if there's a personal ladder you want to climb, not necessarily even a corporate ladder, how do
Mhm.
you get to where you're going to get to, and what are the tools that will get you there? Some of it is an adaptation to the experience you have, and some of it
Right.
is eliminating the experience you have. They're different, and you really need to think that through
Yeah.
with somebody
Yeah,
else.
and the old adage, there are some things you have control over, and there are other things like world events or bad weather that you have no control over. A number of times I've gotten stuck in the traffic and my anxiety levels, I hate being late for anything. Anxiety levels immediately go up if I think I'm going to be late because I'm in traffic. I
Yes,
can't do anything about the traffic, but I
yeah.
can do something about my mindset.
Yes, so I now tell myself it's like getting on a plane and worrying. I'm on the plane already. It's done. I've done what I can do to shake my bones before I got there.
Right.
If I'm in traffic, I really can't do anything about it. I try to not allow myself to get worked up about it because it really goes nowhere.
Yeah, and
Uh,
that comes with age too. I mean, I would say I sort of it's always the same thing. If I had known then what I know now, I think if bringing it back to older executives, there's a different kind of anxiety that comes with getting older and seeing your main purpose for being start to become less important in your life, either voluntarily or involuntarily, your career. Um, but so we've been talking a lot about executive anxiety, but when you move into the next phase of life, I think there's a lot of benefits that you bring with you. Experience. You've probably been through some sort of learning about how to control your emotions. You're more mature in a positive way. But what are some of the anxieties that you're older, you've fit the bill as I am. I'm not retired, but I'm doing something quite different than what I did for my career when I was a consultant. What are some of the anxieties that you've seen in people who are finishing their career or aging out of corporate life?
It's an interesting issue, and I think there's a societal piece to it at this point. I've been told literally by somebody who is younger and aspiring that I should just get out of the way. At my age, I should leave and make room for somebody who is younger and ready to take on the world. That's playing out in our world society.
Yeah, they call it the Joe Biden effect.
Well,
I mean, literally, he was asked to stand aside.
Poor Joe Biden. But I think it's true for all of us. Are we still as vital? Are we hanging on, or are we productive? And if we are productive, what should the decision we're going to make? And will the decision be made for us? Will we? I mean, I know somebody who was let go because there's no other reason for that person to be let go except that he was already older and they were just making room. And he had been successful. He was still successful, and maybe he didn't have another 10 years, but he certainly had another 2, 3, 5 years. And when does that number come? So I think people I did start to think about when I should clear the way for this company that I built, and make room for the people who will succeed me, and sort of more or less handpicked who could do that, with a little bit of an exception. And then, there's an old bromide, if you retire, do not retire without a plan.
Right.
And it really means a plan every day. So a friend of mine who retired said, I learned very quickly, when I wake up in the morning, I know what I'm going to do that day, even if it's nothing.
Right.
Decision. So I think that void creates an anxiety for folks. Are you useful? Are you, what can you do? And there are people who, like me, who then move on to say, I've got, hopefully gray hair gives you some wisdom. That's my way. And maybe I can use that for other people and impart that in a way that I don't have to be the corporate chief any longer, but I can be useful to others in ways that I find more useful to me.
Yeah. And for some, that's an anxious thought to move into a career or to lead your life in a non-structured pathway, if you will. The anxieties that I often see are the usual health and money being the two that people worry about as they get older. Money more than health, and money is the great anxiety driver. The fear of running out because you didn't plan well, or because you were let go earlier than you planned and you never were able to get that job again. And those can be really, really very terrible, because when you get older and you have a financial guillotine looming over your head, or you think you do, and very little recourse to fix it because you can't get a job, for example. I'm not saying that everybody can't get a job, but if you're somebody who has financial issues and you're in your 60s, it's going to be damn hard to get a job. And the thought of becoming an entrepreneur is, for a lot of people who have never done it, really scary. And then the anxiety just ratchets up. And I've seen that in our group and others. So I think that's the prime example. I think everything else I experience is less about anxiety as opposed to annoyance. Well, I get annoyed really easily.
You're replacing the word fear for anxiety, and in those cases are the same thing. It's just a different content to them. But you worry, you're sleepless, you restless when you're up, you're preoccupied with thoughts that are dreadful. Doom is around the corner. I'm miserable. I'm depressed, or I'm now inert because I'm depressed. I mean, they're all sort of particular symptoms, but I think money and health, when you retire, are linked together. Things are expensive, and your need for more health care is, for most people, pretty evident. Some people are lucky, they skate through life without any of that, and I am envious of those people. But there's nothing you can, that's biological. You can't fix that, except hopefully you took good care of yourself while you're earning good money, and it does pay a dividend.
But
but starting to do things that are positive, as you described, are really, if you could put aside the idea that I am now in a void and fill
Mhm.
that void with positive activity, including, small things. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't play a sport, then play a mind game like chess or something. If you do something that will stimulate you, is really a huge remedy for anybody. Isn't I joke about this because somebody asked me the other day, and I said, I wake up every morning and something hurts, and I know I'm alive. And
Yep.
he said, "What a positive outlook."
Yeah, right. No, I mean, you got, in some ways you have no choice, but we're coming to the conclusion here. I do want to say one thing. My life is fairly anxiety free, as I mentioned. The thing I discovered at some point was this is the time of life where you can do whatever the hell you want. You can be whatever you want to be, and nobody's telling you what you need to have. The status symbols suddenly aren't as important anymore. And it took me a while to get used to the fact that I could do and be exactly who I wanted to be and do exactly what I wanted to do. And that was when I learned that, when I figured that one out, the anxiety seemed just superfluous.
Well, I'm grateful that you figured it out, because I think, yeah, you're of value to a larger community than maybe you would have been as an executive in an organization. Very different.
Well,
I think that you found the right calling for yourself. I think I wish for others that they feel the way you do.
I
But
wish that for you, and you add a lot of value to our meetings. So you obviously have a passion for what you do, even beyond the four corners of an office.
it takes a commitment to want to be. So that's the part we're really talking about. And there's so many blocks for being
Mhm.
that. And people, I know I've heard people make the mistake thinking time is the answer to it. So you
Well,
get older and therefore things don't happen that you don't create. Certainly incidents happen around you can't control,
right.
but things don't happen in your life that you don't create semi-purposely. We're not all roadmaps. We don't really I'm really dating myself. You don't go to AAA and get a
Well,
triptych, you flip the pages.
yeah, it's very awesome.
People who are listening to this should remember that. So
Yeah. No, intentionality is the important thing. I think as I've gotten older, I've worked much more from intentions. And, sometimes you can say it's boring because you know how it's going to work out. But it was interesting when I was younger, I sort of knew how things were going to work out, but I didn't want to necessarily always know. And now I work much more from intentionality. And that's also a liberating feeling, is to know that you can make stuff happen simply by wanting it and wanting it to happen. But thanks a lot, Neil. It was great. I will see you at our regular meetings tomorrow evening. Thursday evenings is when the Executives Over 50 meets. I hope the listeners, also the people will be watching the video and didn't see this live, get something out of this. And you have our email addresses below, and you can get in touch with us if you want to talk some more about this subject. And thank you, Neil.
thank you, and thank everybody for joining or watching. There are often answers to your questions. So
You just have to look for them. You just have to keep looking for them.
well.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.